If you like what we do here over at Aircrew Interview and would like to support us and help us grow, you can head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/aircrewinterview, where you can donate monthly. We have different tiers ranging from $1 per month right up to $25, with each tier offering different rewards. All the monthly donations greatly help us to continue creating these video and audio interviews, so please take a look and I thank you in advance. Enjoy. So we are back with Nugs, and if you haven't seen his interviews already, go and watch them. But if you haven't, he flew the F-18, Tornado F3, F5 and A4, and I think you're going to share some DACT stories with us, Nugs.
Yeah, hey, thanks again for having me, Mike. It's always fun to talk with you, and I like watching all your other interviews. I've actually learned a lot from watching them and spending time on them. But yeah, I'd like to talk today. You know, it's your show, whatever you'd like to talk about. But we can talk some DACT stuff. I can relate it to how we did it in the U.S., vice how we did it when I was flying for you guys in the Royal Air Force, and on and on. So yeah, that'd be a great topic today.
So yeah, if you can just start us off. I think you said there's 3 categories in the U.S.
Well, you know, when you say DACT, dissimilar air combat tactics, you know, in the U.S., we use that term as well. But, you know, things have evolved over time, obviously. And, you know, and I'm only going to speak as a misnomer. I'm only going to speak from my time in the military because things have evolved. And also a lot of this topic is on a classified level too, as you can understand, for everybody, including the Royal Air Force. So obviously I'm not going to talk about anything you can't read about in a book or stuff like that. But basically DACT in the US, we would break it down, at least in the Navy and Marine Corps, into 3 categories. Basically OCA, which is offensive counter air, DCA, defensive counter air, and then BFM, which is basic fighter maneuvering. That's basically the 1v1 type stuff with another aircraft. For offensive counter air, that would be more of a mission where you are, you know, it could be 2 of you, it could be 4 of you, it could be 8 of you. Numbers don't really matter, but the mission is basically offensive. Let's say you're fighting your way into a country with air-to-air assets. And then you're looking to either wipe everybody out airborne, or you're fighting your way into a target and then dropping a bomb and then turning around and coming back. That's kind of an offensive mindset. So we would consider that OCA. DCA would be more of a defense of an asset, whether it be a defense of a border, defense of a ship, a defense of a city. It's basically you got point and area defense, where you're building up basically fighter caps, like you hear that word used a lot. And you'd set up caps at different stations along the line, and your whole goal is to protect a certain asset for a certain amount of time. So, you know, you'd have a cap set up, and you'd have 30 minutes on station time. About the time you're going to run out of gas, then a couple of other fighters show up to replace you. You know, just keep filling the line as you go. And that would be DCA. And then BFM, that's the last result. That's coming to emerge with somebody and fighting them one-on-one in air combat, which everybody likes to see. And, you know, that's what it's all about. But quite honestly, if that does ever happen, then things have gone horribly wrong for you, because you should never even end up in that situation, if you know what I mean. But you're still with the assets that we in America and you in the United Kingdom have. You know, we should be able to handle any kind of scenario like that, you know, peer to peer. So a lot of your capabilities for DACT, and I'm going to go back to using that word just so I'm not confusing everybody, is based off of radar and missile capabilities. You know, believe it or not, more so than the aircraft capabilities. I mean, they fall into the aircraft capabilities, but you got an aircraft that flies, you know, Mach 2 and 55,000 feet, but it has a really crap radar. What really good is it to you, right? Or the same thing, it has a really nice radar, but its ability to employ, i.e. the air-to-air missile that it carries, is a limiting factor to the airplane. Then what really good is it to you? So So you're flying around. So basically, your radar and your missile are the biggest assets you have out there. So that's going to basically drive your scenario for DACT, like what kind of defense you can create or what kind of offensive capability you have, right? The actual aircraft plays more of a factor when it comes to BFM, like fighter maneuver against another aircraft. That's going to be based on the capabilities of the airplane. And nowadays, with the ability of helmet mounted cueing systems and off bore sight capabilities of the missile, that will play into effect as well. But back in the days before we have AIM-9X and the ASRAM like you guys have, you're using an old AIM-9 like the Mike, and its off bore sight capabilities are not that great. So the capabilities of the airplane, and even more so the man in the box flying it, mattered more for BFM than it probably does now, if that makes sense. As far as the future, what we've evolved into now for DACT is, you got a net-centric warfare now. Like all the airplanes are tied together through data link. And the battle space in general is completely linked up. So that plays into DACT as well. I talked about earlier the radar capabilities. Radar along with now data link and off-board sensors helping you in the battle space play a big role in the DACT now. So it's not the days of, we're going to launch a force ship of tornadoes. We got our radars, we got our missiles, and we're going to go in and fight this battle. Now everything's tied in together. You got a lot of intel, you got a lot of information that's coming off of your airplane or from another source onto your airplane that really paint the picture for you and help you out. So it's a very modern battlefield now compared to what it used to be. As far as some DACT stuff, in America, we start off in flight school. If you're going fast jets, we fly for advanced, the T-45, which is your Hawk. Has no radar in it, has no offensive capabilities, just an airplane, very much like you guys fly now or fly for flight school. So that's your very basic introduction to not necessarily DACT, certainly BFM, but what the building block of it, flying formation. If you're going to do anything offensive in an airplane, you got to be able to keep yourself relative to the situation. In other words, flying tactical formation, being able to fly, 2-mile combat spread from each other, 1-mile combat spread, things like that. And that's what you start in flight school, like what I'll refer to the Hawk, our T-45. You do a lot of that kind of formation and maneuvering that formation around. And then BFM is really the only thing you do offensive on the T-45. You learn very, very basic fighter maneuver stuff. I remember as a student, that was very hard for me because I had a tough time back then keeping sight. It was very common. You're not used to flying in a dynamic environment. And, the biggest thing was just not to lose sight of the other guy, because if you lose him, you're going to lose. And that was the biggest stressor, was just learning, to pick up angles and rate and know if somebody goes by and their angle and your angle, you kind of know in your mind now where they're going to be at. So you can kind of take your eyes off, look inside the cockpit, and then look back out. He's going to be where you think he's going to be at. And that comes with time. It's kind of like riding a bike when you're a kid. It starts off being really hard, and then you just kind of naturally pick it up. And that's how it was in T-45s. I remember struggling, thinking, man, this sucks. This is no fun. I can't see anybody. I don't know what's going on. And I would go out on a flight, and I remember I wasn't worried about anything other than losing sight of the other guy, and that was the big stressor. And then you get good at it. Then you move on to the F-18. You go to the F-18 training squadron. We call it the Navy Marine Corps, the RAG, Replacement Air Group. I went to the Navy's RAG. Even though I was a Marine, we kind of switch it all up. And we kind of start off where we left off in T-45s, basically tactical formation flying, learning to work a radar, because it's the first airplane you fly with a radar, and learning very basic tactics. And once again, by now you're pretty good about keeping sight of everybody. And now you want to be able to keep sight of everybody, fly your airplane, and work your radar because it's a single seat mentality. And that was very challenging, but that comes along. And once again, it's very basic stuff. When I went through the Tornado F3 RAG, or RTU, or what, I can't remember, OCU.
OCU. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There, thanks, Mike. When I went through the F3 OCU, it was almost identical to going through the F18
Wow.
RAG in the pace of the training, the way it went. It might have been a little faster, leading you up to more advanced stuff in the Tornado OCU, because I think you had NAVs as well. Remember, and with the F3, the radar and all the tactical infrastructure for DACT or long range stuff is basically built around the nav in the back because he's running all that stuff. And so we advanced a little quicker, I think, in the F3, but the same scenarios. We did mainly 2-ship stuff. I don't remember doing 4-ship. We might have, but I don't really remember it. But the real learning, and I found this with the RAF and the F-18, is when you get to your first squadron. You show up basically to your very first squadron. You're kind of on probation, right? Everybody's kind of looking at you. You're kind of like hiding in the corner, and there's always training officers in squadrons, and their job is to take in the new guys, set the standard, make everything standardized, and kind of teach them on their level. And it's kind of nice because instead of being evaluated like in the OCU or our RAG with grades and such, you're part of that squadron now, and it's their goal to make you up to their standards. So there's always going to be somebody to take you under their arm, and say, hey, come here, man, this is the way we do things, and this is how we set the standards, and this is the way it goes. And under that relaxed environment, you almost learn more. You kind of absorb it a little better because you're not as stressed about getting good marks on your flights, or progressing normally with the rest of your class or your mates. So you get in that squadron, and that's when the real learning comes at that point.
Yeah, and there must have been like some great stories from your time on the Hornet and the F3. There must have been some weird engagements there, or some unusual ones, should I say?
Well, like like in the training command of the F-18, I remember one time we went out as a 4-ship, and I don't know how this even happened. We were flying out of Fallon, Nevada. We used to go there. I was in Lemoore, California, and we go to Fallon for debts. And we took off, and we were trying to get a flight in. The weather was going to blow in. It was winter time, and they have like snowstorms come in. And we were going to try to get this flight done. I think it might have been a Friday before the weekend. But anyway, we go out as a 4-ship. And we all end up in bad weather, and we end up as 4 separate airplanes, like diverting. I think 2 of us diverted to Reno, and the other 2 ended up in, I want to say back in Lemoore or Sacramento, which was quite a ways away, and just like you get all kinds of tomfoolery that happens, doing stuff like that. But as far as the RAG goes and training, there was really no good stories, because it's all about a training atmosphere. Moving on to the fleet, all kinds of good stuff. I remember one time we were it was the Tornado. Let me go back to the Tornado, because I think I told your viewers a story about the time we fought the Dutch F-16s that totally annihilated us. And it was a learning experience. It was my first time to do DACT in my fleet squadron, actually, in Treble 1. And it wasn't anything other than we were just learning how to use AMRAAM, and we were trying to do a grinder tactic and got our butts wiped by the Dutch over the North Sea right there. And the thing that I liked about it, and I told this story already, so I won't belabor it, but is when we came back, instead of doing hours long debrief, it was just more like, I guess that didn't go well. And we all just laughed. Oh, that's when I said before, I was like, I'm in the right spot. I kind of like this. But when the F3, we would fight a lot of other countries, which was really nice for me, because I really, believe it or not, as an American, I never the only time I ever did exercises with other countries was at red flags. We would go support a red flag for the Air Force, and you'd have like German GR4s coming over, um, and other countries. The Spanish would be there a lot. I think there's some Spanish F-18s there one time, some Canadian F-18s, and we would do DACT against people like that, but it was very scripted. When you go to big, large force exercises like that, everything's scripted, right? There's going to be the blue air guys and there's going to be the red air guys, and they're told exactly what to do, at what range they're going to notch, and what range they're going to go to the beam, and what maneuver they're going to do, and split into what groups. And so it was never really anything dramatic or exciting about that. The only time something exciting happened at a red flag for me was when somebody diverted and landed at Area 51, which was a big deal. They always tell you, unless you're on fire and going to crash, stay away from that area, because there's a big, juicy runway right there that's very good. But somebody actually landed there. I think it was a German GR4 landed there, and I don't think they were seen again for a while. That was just a rumor. Who knows? But mainly as an American, that was kind of the gist of it. We would go to Iraq, and before the war started in 2003, I was there a couple of times before then, and we would do Operation Southern Watch, OSW, and the Brits were over there too, if I remember right, doing stuff. But we would set up caps all across Iraq, over Kuwait, over the eastern, southern, east, southeastern part of Iraq, and we would just set up caps there, because there was a no-fly zone for the Iraqi military or Air Force couldn't fly south towards that. If so, they'd be shot down. There was a time when it wasn't on my deployment, but it was a friend of mine's deployment. They had set up a DCA cap there, and MiG-25 used to routinely come across the no-fly zone really high and fast, and then turn around and run away because they knew our capabilities and know we weren't going to get to it in time. Well, this F-14 was set up just at the right time that the MiG-25 came across, and I guess they were cleared to engage it. So they were going to launch. They had the Phoenix missile, which was an extremely long range with the AGM-54. I'm sorry, the whatever that.
The Phoenix.
The Phoenix missile was. They actually launched it, and the Phoenix, the motor didn't crank off on it, so it just kind of came off the wing and fell to the ground. So, kind of missed an opportunity to get a MiG-25. And I wasn't on that deployment. It was my squadron that I ended up in, but it was a previous deployment when that happened, and that was a big story back then. But yeah, we didn't get to see any fun stuff. It was all business as usual, Let me think of some other Air Forces I might have fought in the F-18. The Singapore Air Force, we did some stuff against them. The Bahraini Air Force, they had F-16 F-5s. We used to go in the Gulf and do stuff against them. They weren't that great. They were American trained, but they really weren't that. Here's one funny story. So we go over there and we're staying in Bahrain. And we're briefing with the Bahraini Air Force, and this is a long time ago. So I hope I don't get in trouble for telling this story. But we're flying with them, and they had this new jamming pod, right, for their F-16s that the Americans had sold them, and this jamming pod, it was the same one that we carried on our F-16s. Supposedly had good effects against pulse Doppler radars and stuff, and and I'm sure it did, the right version of it. And so they're going to use this against us, and they had just gotten, and they were real excited about it, and they were briefing that we're going to be doing electronic warfare against you, we're going to be jamming you and stuff like this. And so we walk away from the brief, and then this American shows up in our briefing space. Never seen this guy before. This older dude rolls in there, introduces themselves to us and says, "Hey, listen, I think you work for the company that sold that pod." He said, "Listen, they're using their pods tonight. We're just getting them up and running for them. No matter what you see out there, it's probably going to have zero effect on your radar. but just tell them it did. All right, do me a favor and say it worked good. They're like, oh, okay. So we went up there and flew against this pod. Never saw any kind of jamming, not one iota of it. No strobe, no nothing. And then they came back and pretended like in their mind they were invisible to us out there with it and stuff. But I thought that was funny. I never understood what that was really all about. Whether the pod hadn't been the right one was sold to them, they never really turned it on and knew what it was doing, or we sold them some fake pods or something happened. But whoever this secret American guy rolls in there and tells us that they're gonna just pretend they work for them because they're not. I thought that was weird but funny.
Yeah, absolutely. But with the Hornet as well being deployed, I thought you would have a lot of chance to, mix it up with other aircraft in other nations. But it sounds like, yeah, it was just business.
It's all business. When the U.S. deploys, it's one goal, and during that time frame, it was going to the Persian Gulf. So we would leave the West Coast, ship would turn west, we'd go straight past Hawaii, and we would usually stop somewhere in Asia for a port visit, whether it be Singapore, Hong Kong, and then we'd roll into the Persian Gulf, and then we'd spend the rest of the time there. So that's why we would do some stuff with the Bahraini. The Bahrain Air Force. We'd go out and we'd do like a 2-week dead into Bahrain and fly with them. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of opportunity to train with other people. It was all just fast paced, operational rotation type stuff going on. When I went and flew the F3, it was excellent. We during my time there, we did DACT against the Dutch quite a bit because they were right across the North Sea. I think what's the base called? You would know. Was it Leeuwarden or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Does that sound familiar? And I apologize. I've killed a lot of brain cells over the last 20 years, and and we would fight them over the North Sea. Then we were. There was always one of those. They did them every year. Those TLP or something. They used to call them tactical leadership programs.
Yeah.
They would do those. And those guys, I didn't get to do that. They didn't send me to TLP because I already had all those quals, and they wouldn't waste them on American anyway, would they? They'd want to send their own people to go to that course. And but they would get to fight like the French and a lot of cool stuff like that. I got to take a little bit of advantage of that. I would go down. I went to Abu Dhabi in the UAE. They did a TLP there, and I went down there just for support, would fly because they need extra bodies and stuff like that. So we would get to fly. So when my time with the F3, I did DACT with the Spanish Air Force, the Dutch quite a bit across the North Sea there, the French, the Hungarian MiG-29s. I'll tell a story about that.
Oh, yeah.
And then that TLP exercise I went to in Abu Dhabi, the Royal, the Saudi Air Force F-15s were there, the French were there, the Americans were there as well, flying F-16s out of New Mexico, and then us, of course. And I want to say, I want to think there was somebody else there. I guess the Emiratis, they were flying their F-16s as well. With the F3, we went to Hungary one time. Great. We stayed in a place called, I want to say Keskamed or something like that. And it was really, really cool. It was like a small Hungarian city. And once again, as an American, this was great. Like I told you before, I was living a full up Monty Python circus life, all these people talking funny around me, going to these cool places, flying airplanes. It was really, really cool. But we go to Hungary, and I was real excited about that because back in those days, the MiG-29, even though it was getting old, it was still like one of the frontline fighters, right? The Su-27 was out there, but they didn't export those all around the world like the MiG-29 was. So we're doing a dead against their MiG-29s. Really nice guys. Their pilots were all very professional, actually. And they were all Russian trained. Most of them were MiG-21 pilots. And then they evolved into MiG-29 pilots, and they were all a bunch of senior type guys, right? So we got to fly with them, and we flew a little bit with them and against them, and that was super interesting. Just the way they flew their airplane. I felt like their planes were not mission capable in the sense we're used to in the United Kingdom and the U.S. Our planes aren't always up and running, but in general, the very high level of maintenance, and it's not just the maintenance, it's the part structure, the logistics to have things. I felt like out of their squadron, they were only flying maybe a day. They can only get up 2 to 3 airplanes to go flying, which, I wasn't really surprised, but it was a little eye-opening to see their state of readiness, because I took that as a direct reflection on how it must have been in the former Soviet Union as well at the time, right? Because they're all very similar in the way they see things. So we would go fly against them. They're very ground controlled, intercept mindset. They were controlled by ground controllers. They didn't know how to use. They either didn't know how to use their radars very well, or the radars didn't work well. It was a thing, slot back one radar, and we would routinely not get hit with raw, returns from them. Basically, our raw gear wouldn't even pick. I mean, it was like they weren't even using their radar. And in close, you get a little hit off of them. But I was surprised about that, because I always thought that their slot back one was very similar to an APG 65, or almost the 73, which we were flying with at the time in the Hornet. And it wasn't. So their detection was really bad, and they were using GCI to do everything. Also, their maneuverability, once we would fight them, they were very like two-dimensional, not three-dimensional. They come to emerge. We would do some VID stuff where we come to the merge. Then we were expected to do a 2v2 or a 1v1 BFM, and they're very like basically just hard turn on the plane. They didn't really get out of plane or put their nose up, or get the plane flying real slow, not fighting it to its full capability. So I remember fighting a MiG-29 and having the wings full forward on the Tornado, and hanging right with the MiG-29, thinking this guy should be owning me right now just by the capabilities, not because he's better, but the capabilities of that airplane, it should be turning better than that, right? And it should be flying a lot slower than I can go. Though you could get pretty slow in a Tornado, but not like a MiG-29, right? And no, they were not. It was like they had hard limits, like, we're not going to get our nose more than 30, 40 degrees above the horizon. We're not going to slow below 200 knots, type of deal. They had these big numbers, and it seemed like they stuck with them, and they were very limited on the way they fought us. In fact, the weather was real bad on one flight, and me and my wingman joined up with the MiG-29, and he was going to take us back to the base, right? We were just like, we'll just join up with him and follow him, instead of trying to understand all these controllers and stuff. We'll just have him fly us back. And we're in the clouds, we're flying around in the goo, and all of a sudden, man, I'm just glued onto his wing. And my navigator, I believe it was Gilly, one of my favorite guys to fly with there, he goes, hey, Nugs, man, check your airspeed. We're getting kind of slow here. And I was feeling like the plane was mushy, and I looked down, and I in my HUD, I think we were going like, it was like 180 knots or something like that. You know what I mean? Which, that's not catastrophic, but I'm saying flying around IFR in the clouds as a three ship at 180 knots, and probably at 10,000 feet too. I'm like, this guy's completely lost essay to his airspeed. He's messing this up. And then what do? How do I tell him? Hey, watch your airspeed. I know what I would say if it was somebody else, but, there's a little bit of a language barrier and stuff. And I think we just said, hey, can you speed it up? And he finally got it and sped back up, because he knew he had messed up. He just completely lost essay of how fast he was going, doing something else. But, that's when you're glad you have a nav in the back or a Wizzo to help you out.
Yeah, keep you in check. So on that that debt, how long you were there for, and did you ever talk to them and say, maybe you could do this better with that aircraft, or were you not in that position to tell them how to do things?
No, we were there for, I want to say, 2 weeks, and as far as that goes, there was one guy. He was a colonel, and he was a really nice guy that I kind of befriended over there, and he took me and some of the other pilots out to a pub in town, kind of showed us around, and he would ask me questions like that. It's funny you say that. He would ask me, what do you think so far, and what? And as you know, I'm a respectful guy. I'm not going to wear him out. If he were under my charge, or I'm fighting a war with him or something, yeah, I'm going to make sure that he
Of course.
understands what he needs to do or how to do it. But in a situation like that, you're kind of being a diplomat too, right? You don't want to embarrass the guy or make him feel like you think poorly of him. So if he asked me a question, I would give him a direct answer, but I wouldn't bring anything
But
up.
so you wouldn't say like you could do this better if they came to you. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, no, he'd have to come to me for that. I remember him asking me some questions, but also, excuse me, during that time, you got to also think about, I also have to be careful about what I say too, right?
Of
Because
course.
all these people, I mean, countries like that, they're all intel gathering
Of
apparatuses as
course.
well. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They want to know what we think about and this and that. In fact, real quick, since I mentioned that, we were in Mountain Home, Idaho. We came down to when I was flying the F3, we brought them over here to America, to Idaho, to Mountain Home Air Base, Air Force Base, and did a det there, which was really neat. And the French were there as well. And I remember the French guy came over and asked our squadron if we would give him a brief on the AMRAAM, the AIM 120, which we had just integrated into the Royal Air Force, AIM 120 Block 5s, and he wanted a brief on it. And one of the guys in our squadron told him, "Yeah, we can give you a brief on it." And I was like, I went to our weapons flight commander at the time, John Shields, and he and I talked about this. We're like, "Absolutely, you're not going to give him a brief, on the AIM 120. This guy just wants to know about it. It's not something he needs to know, right?"
Yeah. Of
So
course.
that kind of stuff goes on. When you're mixing air forces and stuff, that goes on. There's notorious stories from Red Flag where, you know, um, intel gathering stuff going on over there. The French are really bad about that, and the Americans are too. We're probably the best at it, but that's what it's all about. They go up there and try to soak up as much information as they can. Nothing's changed.